do a lot worse with your weekend than hear from Gerald Small. So make it welcome.
Thanks, Jess, and thanks everyone. As Jess mentioned, I was a long-time construction worker. I started in the industry in 1999, worked my last shift in 2016, so off and on, nearly 2 decades. And for most of that, well, for all of that time, I was a proud member of the CFMEU, just gave up my ticket about a year ago. And for most of that time, the main slogan of the construction union was, "We built this city." And it's always a slogan that I've been a little bit ambivalent about, sort of like, oh my God, we built that? Jesus Christ. And like people have a justifiable pride, it's the workers who build this entire city. It's not the multiplexes, it's not the money bags, it's not the people who sit in their Collins Street offices, it's the workers who get up at 5 in the morning, that lay every brick, that pour every cubic metre of concrete and so on. But at the same time, what the hell have we built? Most of the projects I worked on, as the massive housing crisis that we're now in the grips of, that housing crisis has been coming for 2 decades. Most of the buildings that I built were not houses, were not even apartments, weren't flats, they weren't units, they were shopping malls. I built an extension on the Crown Casino, I built a new car park for the Crown Casino, I built a new hotel for the Crown Casino, I built a massive shopping mall for Westfield out at a shopping town in Doncaster, not because the residents were up in arms, we must have more shops. There's plenty of shops around there, it's just about market share and funneling it into the pockets of someone who happens to own that bit of land and that particular shopping mall. A whole bunch of spotlights, like right next to strip shopping centres became shopping malls. That was the sort of work that we were doing. So to me, like the housing crisis that we're in and the fact that, like me and, the 20,000 other 30, 40, however many construction workers there are in Melbourne have spent so much time building extensions on the casino and shopping malls when we should have been building low-cost, quality public housing. Well, if we'd had a say about it, if we had actually been asked, okay, which would you rather be doing? Like some monument to, like yet another shopping mall to funnel more money into the pockets of the billionaires, or somewhere where you and your family and people in your community can live at low cost for the rest of their lives? Which would you rather be? We're not given that choice, and that really is the heart of the problem. Which is what Steph would have talked about if she'd made it here today. And she's got, she sent me the notes for her talk, and it's a whole lot more poetic than what you're going to get from me. You'll get disgruntled, older, ex-construction worker shouting a fair bit probably by the end of it. But Steph, one of the points that she was making was, it's not like it's some unknown thing. When we achieve socialism, there's going to be all sorts of problems in this world that will be quite hard to deal with, that will be, will require a lot of experimentation, a lot of research and a lot of discussion and so on to work out, okay, exactly how we're going to tackle the mess that, capitalism is turning our planet into. How are we going to tackle climate change? How are we going to tackle all sorts of things? Building our cities in a way that gives housing and dignity and security and joy to ordinary people who live there. This is not one of those things. Like the research has been done 100 years ago. The very first planning scheme for Melbourne was full of, okay, we know exactly how much parkland every child needs, we know how far they will walk to that parkland, but we're still building suburbs that don't meet those minimum criteria. Steph had a whole sort of thing, like people have done studies in the exact depth of the front garden that encourages conviviality. So you can sort of hang out there, you can have those soft engagements with your neighbours and all the rest of it, but we don't build houses like that. There's a million things like that. People know the exact width of the footpath that encourages people to actually walk around rather than to drive. People know how far the supermarket should be from each house so that you can walk there rather than have to. All of these things are known, but none of it matters unless it makes a profit. And that is the fundamental problem, of course. So, let's start with the housing crisis. We're being told that the solution to this crisis is that we have to rip up every planning rule. Now, this is a bit strange in Victoria because if you know the history, Jeff Kennett actually ripped up every planning rule back 30 years ago. We don't so much have a planning scheme, but a development scheme, and that's been the case for 30 years. But nevertheless, we're being told that we have to rip up every planning rule, and that will somehow ease the housing crisis. Never mind the fact that about half of the approvals that happen for houses in this city are not built within 5 years. They're traded to other capitalists, they're land banked and so on. Never mind the fact that out of the houses that are built, something like 10% of them are empty on census night, that there are tens of thousands of empty houses all around this city. No, we're being told that the entire system of profit-first development, which has led us to this crisis, we have to double down on that in order to deal with this crisis. I think it's all bullshit. And if you look at the number one reason why houses are not being built right now, it's not like, planning rules and regulations, it's the capitalist market. At the very time that we're being told, oh my God, there's this housing crisis, we need more supply, we are building fewer houses than what we in this country than what we have in 11 years. And that's not a mystery. It's because the Reserve Bank has jacked up interest rates, so the whole housing market, which is meant to supply our needs, is now in crisis. Investment is at a low. So at the time when we should be building more houses, actually we're building fewer than we have for more than a decade. This is the glories of the capitalist market, and we're being told that that is the solution. We know that it's not the solution. We know that it's the problem. Here's a radical idea. Build more public housing. Perhaps treat housing not as a commodity to be bought and sold, but the purpose of building a house is to house people. Very radical idea. I'm glad that most of you are sitting down, it's a very unusual idea at this time. It's actually huge swathes of the working class grew up in public housing in many, many countries around the world. Like Britain, for generations, it was just this is how the working class lived. The local council built the houses, you paid a small rent, once your kids moved out or whatever, okay, you could move into a smaller place, the rent would build the houses for the next generation of people. There was nothing very complicated about it. There was only two fatal problems for this scheme of public housing. Number one, that it didn't enrich an entire army of parasites, of real estate agents, of property developers, property managers, and so on. And number two, that it left the working class just too damn secure. That it was possible to go on strike. If you're a miner, you could go on strike for a year in 1984-85 and you would not be evicted from your house because you were living in council housing or in coal corporation housing. No. The ruling class didn't want workers to be that secure. They want us, to be in debt for our entire lives. The number of times I was working in construction, people say, oh, look, Terry, I'm good on you. Look, I'd back you up on this, but I'm behind in my mortgage payments. I can't afford to lose this job, Like that dull compulsion of economic facts is imposed on us, and one of the ways it's imposed on us is through the housing market. There's nothing natural about it. So yeah, building public housing, not just, like the extra $2.5 billion that the Greens are proposing, that'd be fucking fantastic and good on them for pushing it. But like to have it as one of the main ways that ordinary people are housed. We build houses for ourselves, we live in them, pass them on to the next generation and so on, rather than have them land banked by a bunch of property speculators. So there's an idea. Yes to public housing, yes to a rent freeze, of course. Great that the Greens have publicised that. We're proud of our little bit in popularising that idea in the last couple of electoral cycles. And also, like while we're on the topic of building empty houses, how about actually grabbing those empty houses and using them to house people? This was, I know, I'm glad you're all sitting down. Kath Larkin is around here somewhere, who was Victorian Socialist candidate for Lord Mayor of Melbourne. That would have been a lot of fun. I don't know whether the footage is around of this electoral forum that the Property Council of Australia did during that particular local council election, where Kath explained the Victorian Socialist policy was, look, if a house has been empty for 2 years, we're just for the government acquiring that and housing homeless people and reducing the rent. So I don't know whether the footage is around of the good burghers of the Property Council of Australia literally clutching at their pearls and gasping and muting their Zoom or whatever so that they could recover from the shock. Now, it's a mark of the political power of the property industry that the Lord Mayor of Melbourne is Sally Capp. Her previous job was CEO of the Property Council of Australia. That whole industry of parasites and so on, the Property Council of Australia is the very peak industry body, and they run the city of Melbourne. And of course, we know that their political power extends not just in the CBD and the surrounds, but to the outer suburbs as well. And it was such an experience for a lot of us going out to suburbs, like Jess just referenced Calcallo in the northern suburbs, where it was that bad it got on ABC TV, and they're interviewing people. We door knocked the area a couple of times. On an average day, it will take you 40 minutes just to get out of your estate onto the Hume Highway to start your commute. It will take 45 minutes to drive 3 kilometres away, because there's no footpaths, to drop your kids at school. And like, so I was sort of scratching my head saying, okay, how does it happen that you build an entire suburb and you don't actually there is no way out of the suburb. So I did a little bit of research and found that the block of land that Calcalla was built on was bought by a Melbourne property developer in 1979 for $1 million. And then it was sold about 25 years later for $300 million to the Stockland Group. The Stockland Group are developing Calcalla at the moment, and they say that the final value of the land, not the stuff on it, not the buildings, but the land, will be $4 billion. If you look at very next door housing estate, Merrifield Estate, that's owned by, Michael Buxton from MAB Corporation. Oh, Michael Buxton, okay, what's he worth? The very first thing that comes up is his private yacht called Black Pearl. These people are literally, the property developers are literally sitting on their private yachts, while the working class people who bought houses on their estates are literally sitting in traffic for hours and days and weeks and months and years of their lives. And that is the sort of power that capital has over our cities. So, to finish up, to change any of that, will take a lot of stubborn resistance. And it's fantastic that we've got Margaret Kelly here. Like, if you want stubborn resistance, like in terms of saving public housing, really looking forward to hearing Margaret and the struggle going on just a few kilometres from here in Barrack Beacon. It will need political advocacy. It will involve knowing our history. In Verity, we'll be talking about the Builders Labourers Federation. And sure as hell, it will need a socialist voice for all of this. It will need a bunch of stubborn bastards like all of us saying, yes, we want rent controls. Yes, we want public housing. Yes, we want cities for people before profit. But actually, we want to take the whole damn world back. And in the words of James Connolly, our demands are most modest. We only want the earth.
Might be better if she comes to you.
Okay, so as Jerome said, our next speaker here is Margaret Kelly. Supporting and building and renewing public housing across Australia is something that Victorian Socialists hold very dear. We think, like Jerome says, that it's a vital part of working class living standards, but also, as I said, we think shelter is a right, and that is one of the government providing affordable, central, comfortable, well-maintained public housing is a vital part of a decent society. That is exactly the opposite direction to what the current Labor government in Victoria is going in. Instead, there's less and less public housing, and it's being turned over, it's being allowed to be run down. The residents are being asked to leave, and not every resident is taking it. And one of the residents who's fighting to stay in Barrack Beacon Estate in Port Melbourne is Margaret Kelly, and we're very proud to have her here and be able to share her story and be able to do some part in publicising what is going on in Victoria under our very noses. So please make her welcome.
Yeah, just slightly, that'd be good. Yep, perfect. Yep, great.
Okay, is that good?
Yep, great.
Can you hear me? I don't like microphones, I have difficulty with them. Yeah, right under our noses is the amazing stunt that this government, this Labor government has pulled off, is pulling off. Just like everybody else, I was reading the paper and it said we're building more social and affordable housing. I thought, goody, more public housing. No. So on the 13th of December 2021, the government, Homes Victoria, decided to spring on us that we were going to be relocated because our beautiful housing estate was to be redeveloped. Our estate. It's tucked down the end of Garden City, well, the end of Port Melbourne. It used to be just a name on a bus, Garden City. When I moved there, people said, oh no, you can't possibly go there, it's so dangerous, there's terrible people down there. It was okay, they dangerously helped me carry my shopping and things like that. It was a lovely place to live. It was cut off from the rest of the world by a piece of contaminated land where an oil storage facility was built. We were built on industrial land that had been abandoned since the Second World War. You know, it just wasn't highly desirable real estate. We had sea views, but at that point you couldn't give them away to people. Then they built Beacon Cove across the road, and suddenly this crazy thing happened where everybody wanted to come and live there. Well, that was nice. You know, I appreciate that finally people are going, oh yeah, there's a lovely place, it's by the sea, it's near the city. I shouldn't have thought that. So the plans for our housing estate is to demolish beautifully designed 1970s state-of-the-art public architecture. It's made a safe place because it is designed not just for houses, but to build a community. And that's exactly what it was, not the sort of community where everybody has barbecues together, but the sort of community where you all know who your neighbours are, and you know that if you yell, somebody will come and help you, you know? So it was a very diverse community, but it was just amazingly peaceful, and the kids grew up really well there because there were a lot of eyes on them. It's designed around courtyards, so, you know, no kid wanders off without somebody knowing what's happening. So that was what we had there, and I think probably Homes Victoria should have come and gone, gee, this place doesn't have the trouble other places have. Even our local police said we hardly ever get called out there. You know, that is the reputation. Across the road now we have this really fancy housing estate and they say we're not troublesome. So, you know, it just seems that destroying it is counterproductive to me, since Homes Victoria say their aims is to create homes. But what Homes Victoria is actually there for is to dismantle the public housing system. They have an advisory board. The head of it is the Minister of Housing. All the rest of them work in housing development. And until this happened to me, they've done just such a good job of this PR thing. So all sorts of nice, lovely people think they're building more public housing. And are really kind of in denial about it. They actually get really upset when you say, no, that's not what they're doing, because what they're doing is destroying public housing, a lot of it heritage, beautiful buildings. Abbotsford Street would make you cry if you could go to Save Barrack Beacon on Facebook. There's a lovely video of Abbotsford, and those tenants were chucked out in 2018. On that site now, there's a big school. There's some private townhouses. They still have not completed the social housing. The social housing is a little scrap that they have to put in. And that is, so on these sites, they're building 70-75% private housing market rates. Then they get in a housing association. Now, I don't want to be mean about housing associations, but they were created to fill a gap when there wasn't enough public housing in an area. So good people got together and in their local community had more housing built. That's great. But what some of them have turned into now are giant real estate companies that manage properties all over Victoria. The most recent, the only kind of bit of social housing they've managed to finish so far has been bought by an organisation called Evolve that are from New South Wales. Like, they're not even a Victorian housing association. So, yeah, the amazing thing is that they have pulled this off in plain sight. Of good people. I always thought Australians would never let anything happen to public housing. It never occurred to me that they could do it without anybody knowing. So it's been terrible on my estate. People are in public housing because they're vulnerable. That's, you know, the people who live here. So what was really obvious, that happened in December and January, you just started seeing things started to crumble, just around the 14 units around my courtyard. One person had a stroke, she was only in her 50s. My next door neighbour's kidneys failed. Couple of people who had become more outgoing sort of retreated back into becoming housebound. One young chap got very stressed and he had just got an apprenticeship with Mercedes and somehow he lost that job, you know. There was just a lot of bad luck things that happened to people, and of course those things happen to people, but they don't usually happen all in the same month, you know. And the research shows that that is what's happened. It's researched over and over again. Homes Victoria apparently appointed someone to do research on their first project in Kensington, and the results were so bad that they tried to suppress them. The author of the work had to do a Freedom of Information Act to be able to speak about her own work. They haven't done any research since. So, you know, they know that that has happened. My next door neighbour, for whatever, they've treated people very unequally in relocating them, and she was one, even though she was so ill, you would think that they'd want to wrap her up in tissue paper and be so careful with her, and instead they offered her one lousy property after another and ignored what she was asking for. And about 4 weeks ago, she was finally about to sign the lease on a property, which wasn't actually what she wanted, but she was just too exhausted. But they were coming into the hospital to sign the lease, and she died the night before it happened. And, you know, they don't, anyway, sorry. They do not take responsibility for that. So, you know, I don't know what will happen on this site. They're demolishing it now. There are 7 buildings. They've got 2.5 of them down. The workers on the site think they're demolishing buildings for making room for more public housing. And that's what people think. And I keep having this conversation over and over again saying, no, 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 that's not what's happening. There's an enormous amount of grief, even from people who thought, well, this will be okay. They'll give me a nice private rental to live in. And I had someone come and visit yesterday and just burst into tears, talking about it, you know, about how she's feeling about, there's a term for it, root shock, you know, when you're hauled out of your home. Like moving house, everybody moves house, nobody ever likes moving house, but when you're moving house to go to a nicer house, to go to a better job, to be near your family, I mean, that's a challenge, it's annoying, but when you're being pulled out of the only safe home you've ever had, which in this person's case, it just has this whole emotional impact that you can't describe. And so many of the tenants weren't even expecting that, you know, it was like several months later it finally hit them that what they had lost. So I think that's about, so at the moment we're having a vigil at Barrack Beacons 3 to 5 every day. We've got lovely people who will make you a cup of coffee and we have biscuits. Tomorrow we're having a morning tea at Barrack Beacon, so if you come to the corner of the Boulevard and Beacon Road, you will find us. We have a Facebook page, Save Barrack Beacon. Apparently we have Instagram and Twitter now because somebody really techie's got involved. I forgot even to mention wonderful Office, who are pro bono architects who designed a way of renovating the buildings without removing the tenants, using the buildings by restructuring the insides, making them accessible, sustainable, modern, oh God, all the good words that Homes Victoria keeps coming up with. They're going to added another 238 units on spare land, you'd think, and it will cost $88 million, so you would think Homes Victoria will be going, great, give us a look at that, but they only look at it to sort of combat it. They say things like, we don't believe that, we don't think that, I don't like it. But it shouldn't be about what bureaucrats think or like. It's about facts. It's about the fact that it kills people. It's killed my next door neighbour, and we were neighbours for 25 years, and we didn't always agree about everything, but we always supported each other. So I'm a bit annoyed with them. Anyway, so please come. There's a petition. Look at Facebook. I've got flyers. Thank you. Still a little bit of beeping and movement. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Margaret, and definitely endorse people going to check out their Facebook page and getting down to Barrack Beacon to show your support. Our next speaker is also facing eviction this time from Techno Park. This is a community of 100 people or so who've been living there for decades, and the council just recently has declared that they're going to enforce out of nowhere some bullshit technicality old zoning law. These zoning laws have not stopped them accepting registration fees for people's pets. It hasn't prevented real estate developers from selling off these properties as residential addresses. But overnight, the council has decided that these 100 people just need to get out. They can go anywhere, but you can't stay here, kind of thing. And so the people that live there have organised a residents' association to try and fight back. As socialists, we stand with people who are fighting for righteous causes everywhere they are on every terms. And so it's a great pleasure to welcome Lara to speak on their behalf today. That's all right.
You want to come out this way? You want to come out this way?
Thank you everyone for having us, Margaret and Jerome. I live with my partner Juan Camilo at the Techno Park estate in Williamstown. It's a beautiful place to live. We live in brick units that were built in the 1960s to house migrants and refugees. And people have been living there for many decades. It's an amazing community. Our neighbours are children, migrants, queer people, First Nations people, a lot of elderly people who are single and who consider the community their family. In 1988, Hobsons Bay Council zoned our street Industrial 1, but they've chosen to never enforce that zoning, and people have been living there for many years. Industrial 1 means that you can have storage and various kinds of manufacturing that doesn't cause any safety risk to the community or to the environment. So that means, for instance, in our street, to give you a picture, we have some storage as well as housing. We've got some storage. Across the street, there's like a tropical fish aquarium. There's a boutique coffee maker. You can buy a espresso machine for $6,000 if you would like to. There's a few offices. There's the Corroy Creek and wetlands at the end of our street. And on one side of us are some disused petrol tanks that were part of the Mobil refinery, which closed down in 2020. And on the other side of that is a newly refurbished children's football ground, which the council has just put $4 million into. In May, the council sent notices to every address in the street, every address, including the coffee place, you know, saying, we know that you are unlawfully using this premises for residential use. You must leave immediately. And if you don't, we will commence legal action against you. If you would have trouble leaving your home immediately, you must make yourself known to the council, and we will consider up to 6 months extension. People who did contact the council have had very different experiences depending on who they are. One of my neighbours is an employment lawyer. He made contact with the council. They gave him an executive, the ironically named Director of Sustainable Communities. And she and the planning staff said, we are so sorry, this is dreadful. We wish we could do something. There's nothing, you know, but we will do whatever we can do to help you, you know, to give you the time you need to move you and your children somewhere else. Another neighbour of ours who is a renter, who lived for 7.5 years in the Hobsons Bay Caravan Park, which was also for more than 30 years on industrial land, before it was sold off to developers and zoned residential by the council, and now is full of millions of dollars worth of properties. She had been displaced from the caravan park. She'd come to live here at Techno Park. She's lived there for 7.5 years. As soon as she got the notice, she called, and she was given to a compliance officer who said, you have to be out in 2 weeks. Right. He then said, okay, I'll give you an extension, 2 months. She said it was one of the most degrading experiences of her life. She decided she would go, and she found friends that she could stay with in St Albans. She's come back today because she moved into her friend's bungalow in St Albans, and the council there said, no, you can't have people living in your bungalow. You need a planning permit to do that. Since this has happened, the line from the council is that we are suddenly in immediate danger of the empty petrol tanks next door. We're in what's called, so all Hobsons Bay is full of mobile sites. Some of them are, you know, active, others not. They're going to turn the refinery into an import terminal, so they will be doing work and they will be using some of that land, but not all of it. People live all over, right next to petrol tanks and other, you know, mobile infrastructure. We're in what is called the inner advisory area of a major hazard facility. The inner advisory area means that there is a risk greater than of one fatality greater than 1 in 10 million years. We want to be safe, you know, we take our safety very seriously. In 2020, new apartments called the Gem Apartments were built down the road on Point Gellibrand in Williamstown with an ocean view in the inner advisory area of an active mobile site. So the council is saying we can't live there because it's too dangerous next to the tanks. They couldn't possibly change the zoning for that reason. And that they said in a council meeting the other night, oh, historically we have never accepted people living on industrial land. Did they not know that there was a caravan park with 200 people on the waterfront for more than 30 years? Have they not known that we've been here, some people, for 30 years at Techno Park? It's not a secret. You know, anyone who lives in Hobsons Bay will tell you they know Techno Park. They've known people who live there, and it's very disturbing to us. It's caused people enormous distress. There's even if nothing else happened, even if they never enforced this eviction, the harm they have done to people and the way they have endangered people's lives is so extreme. That's all I'd like to say, I think. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I would like to say one more thing, which is we delivered a petition, a local petition to our council on Tuesday night. We also had a rally outside. We had lots of friends and supporters come, and it was really amazing for people at Techno Park to feel just how much the kind of care for the community that we have inside extends beyond that. So thank you everyone who came to that. And we've also started an online petition, which we understand is really useful for showing that there's actually broad community support for people to remain in their homes and to get secure, a secure zoning. That means we can remain there permanently, and this can't happen again in 6 months or a year or whatever. So our online petition is change.org/techno-park, and if everyone would sign it and share it, we would really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we've got 2 more speakers for this section of the meeting before we open it up just for a little bit of commentary and questions, discussion points, whatever from the floor. The next speaker I'll introduce is Verity Bergman. She's an adjunct professor at Monash University, a political scientist, and when it comes to some of the most important working class, most powerful political struggles over the shape of this city, the struggle of the Builders Labourers Federation, she literally wrote the book. So she's something of an expert. It's an honour to have her here, and please make her feel welcome.
Thanks very much. Right, can you hear me? Yes. Urban planning theorists write about the planning role of property capital, which we all here know should be called the very bad planning role of property capital, the way that developers increase their profits by maximising advantages from the environment, by erecting high-rise buildings, building luxury rather than affordable housing, by developing projects where shopping centres, office blocks and luxury housing are integrated so that they pocket the price paid by the affluent residents to be near the shopping facilities and more from the shopkeepers for access to a wealthy clientele and so on. The Green Bands movement of the New South Wales Builders Labourers Federation between 1971 and 1975 directly challenged this very bad planning role of property capital. They halted $5,000 million worth of development at early 70s prices. And the Green Bands, as they were called, were the first of their type in the world. It was Jack Mundy, the leader of this wonderful movement, who coined the term Green Ban to distinguish it from the traditional union Black Ban. The movement was based on the concept of the social responsibility of labour, that workers had a right to insist that their labour not be used in harmful ways. And the BLs disputed developers' rights to build what they liked, where they liked, and they defended their bans on picket lines and at demonstrations, enthusiastically supported by resident activists and environmentalists, all mobilising under the Green Band slogan of people before profits. The Green Bands were of 3 main kinds: to defend open spaces from various kinds of development. For example, the first one at Kelly's Bush in June 1971, the Botanic Gardens, Centennial Park. Secondly, to protect existing housing stock, predominantly working class, from demolition to make way for freeways or high-rise development, for example, the Rocks, Woolloomooloo, Victoria Street. And thirdly, to preserve older style buildings of historic architectural and cultural significance from replacement by office blocks or shopping precincts. The bans were placed at the request of resident action groups or organisations such as the National Trust. So how and why did it happen? There were lots of reasons. I'll just mention three. Firstly, the general economic and industrial relations conditions. There was very low unemployment, high inflation, very high strike rates. The penal powers threat had recently been removed following the Clary O'Shea case of 1969. Secondly, the building boom and changes within the industry. So militancy was thriving in this building boom climate, and workers were clustered together on large city projects, and the BLs were favoured more than the tradesmen by particular changes going on in the industry. For example, the increased use of concrete. The BLs handled concrete, so breaking a concrete pour was a particularly powerful form of threat or deterrent. And thirdly, the radical ideological influences on the membership and leadership of the union. Jack Mundey and Joe Owens were both in the Communist Party, and the CPA had recently split, and the Moscow liners and the China liners had left. So the CP remaining became very influenced by New Left ideas that were popular at the time. But why did the radicalism of the New South Wales BLF manifest itself in environmental bans? Well, they accepted this principle of the social responsibility of labour, and so it was natural for them to question the products that they themselves were making. And there were very good reasons for the BLs to recoil from the work that they were being paid to do. They could see, for example, that the CBD was becoming massively overdeveloped. Mundy always stressed the connection between the profit motive of the developers and wasteful inefficiency, that there were millions of square feet of vacant office space in Sydney centre, while, as he said, people looking for their first homes or flats could find nothing. And BL's work also made them particularly aware of waste in the industry, because it was primarily BLs who demolished the existing, often still very useful buildings to make way for office blocks or whatever. As Joe Owen said, it was BLs who broke the ground when this kind of public vandalism takes place. So it was easier for them to see the contradictions in the building boom and the terrible consequences in human terms than other building workers. And at the same time, it was the BL's role in demolition at the very early stages that gave them the power to prevent the environmental irresponsibility that they were coming to abhor. So they believed that they had a special responsibility to alert the wider community to problems in the building industry, and their concerns were also informed by the growing environmental awareness of the time. And so it was the sort of, they found that green ideas were a good way of articulating their natural antipathy towards their employers, whom they loathed. There was a Green Band song, which I won't sing it. Just one verse from it shows what they were on about. Now, before the city's wrecked, these developers must be checked, for it's plain to see they don't give a bugger. And we soon will see the day, if these bandits have their way, we'll all be driven out past Wagga Wagga. But the union was accused by other unions of neglecting its working class members to suit the interests of the trendies. So there was this assumption around at the time, it's still around, that an alliance of workers and middle class environmentalists was mainly benefiting the latter. But the New South Wales BLF argued that it was workers who suffered most from environmental problems. And so it was working class people who would benefit most from improved environmental planning and town planning. Mundy pointed out that it was the workers who lived in the most polluted and the least leafy localities, so it made sense for workers to link up with environmentalists and so on. And in fact, the Green Band's campaign showed that defence of the environment didn't benefit the affluent more than the poor. Most of the green bans protected traditionally working class inner city areas. Yes, the campaigns to defend open spaces may have favoured middle class rather than working class interests, but the campaigns to protect inner city buildings overwhelmingly express the determination of working class residents to stay put in their traditional communities. And the movement also stressed the need to preserve these suburbs for poorer people and not as renovated neighbourhoods for the middle class. In any case, the union's involvement with resident activism meant that NIMBY politics wasn't happening, because with the green bans as the ultimate factor, it meant that working class neighbourhoods had just as much clout as more affluent neighbourhoods to prevent crazy development. So the green bans seriously thwarted the remorseless quest for profit, and the degree of resistance from developers just showed how much the green bans were threatening them, hence their collusion with the corrupt federal Maoist line BLF here in Melbourne to break the union. Fortunately, much had already been saved. For example, the Rocks and Botanic Gardens, and the BL's refusal to build bad led way to often to good projects, such preventing the freeway running through Glebe led to the construction of the Glebe public housing estate. And of course, you know, the Rocks, I mean, the developers wanted it to be a concrete and glass extension of the CBD. You wouldn't get, you know, the tourist dollar coming in to see that. So there are important lessons for the left today, that a green movement that can't rely on trade union power is very weak, because the withdrawal or threat of the withdrawal of Labor is the ultimate deterrent to environmental vandalism on the part of property capital. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, thank you, Verity, and thanks for contributing something to being part of our little project to rebuild some of those movements today. Our last speaker, before I open it up to get a few people from the floor so we can have a bit more of an open discussion, is Grace Hill. Grace Hill is the National Union of Students Education Officer. She's a renter. She's sorry. She's the National Union of Students official. She's a renter. She's got some first-hand kind of experiences about the state of the Melbourne rental market to share with us, and she's a member of Socialist Alternatives. So please make her welcome.
All right. Well, oh yes, I'll let you take your mask back. Do I have some experiences? I'm going to assume that quite a significant proportion of the room here rent. So you all would know how precarious and expensive it is to be a renter today. And I hope you'll indulge me for 1 minute going through a bit of a rapid tour through my rental history, because my experience, I think, is actually a pretty good case study of the state of renting today. So I've moved house 6 times in the last 6 years, only twice because I actually wanted to. And thinking about it when I was putting this together, I realised it has actually been almost 10 years since I lived in any place for more than 18 months at a time. And each time I've had to move, it of course costs hundreds and hundreds of dollars just in the moving costs before you get even to the attempt that the property manager inevitably makes to take the bond and put it into the landlord's trip to Bali fund. And in my current share house, just this week on Wednesday, we have been notified of a $200 rent increase. But no booze and everything. You have to hear about the premium features of my house that actually justify this increase. So we have a really deluxe special kind of oven that doesn't come with an ignition switch. So you have to put your head right in to light it up the back, which is a real experience. Just gas yourself every time you want to cook anything. We've got these great doorknobs. Anyone that's been around to my house for dinner knows about these. They just come right off. So This is quite exceptional when you have someone over, entertain them as a guest, and they have to cry for help to be let out of the toilet because the doorknob has just flown off the second that they tried to let themselves out. And we've also got this wonderful indoor water feature, very deluxe. Basically how it works is you turn on any tap and then it just doesn't drain out of the sink. So we've got our own ponds, fountains, you name it. So we're actually pretty lucky that the rent increase was only $200. This is a real kind of palatial place that we're getting for a bargain. So I want to talk a bit about why it's like this, because I'm sure all of you have actually had very similar experiences, probably with a lot more mold involved. Like I'm in a bit of a lucky situation with no mold in the current place. And I want to talk about, why it's like this and what we do about it. So on why, all of this kind of stuff about the rental crisis at the moment is just explained like it's a force of nature, almost like it's the weather. You know, it's something that nobody has any control over. No one can do anything about it. But the fact of house prices in this country increasing 412% over the last 25 years and rents inflating double digits year on year is actually the culmination of a series of choices, political choices to make housing for a profit. And specifically, the crisis today is continued by political choices being made by this government to allow banks and private investors to squeeze tenants for all they're worth. So in the post-war years, actually about 70% of households in Australia owned their own home. And as well as that, 18% of all housing built in New South Wales in the years after the war was public housing. In Melbourne, there was a period where 27 public housing towers went up across 19 suburbs. But from the 70s, governments have just slashed spending for public housing, and under a Labor government in the 80s, tax concessions were given to incentivise speculation in the property market by the rich. And that rush to speculate and invest became a total stampede under John Howard in the 90s, as further discounts on capital gains tax made property even more lucrative for investors, and house prices and rents correspondingly have risen. So these politicians, through this whole time, through choices to end public housing in this country effectively, and choices to give billions of dollars a year in handouts, that's what it is, handouts to investors via negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions, has actually just transformed housing, something that's necessary for our lives, into an investor's bonanza. And it's often really condescendingly explained to us as renters that this is actually all a really good thing for homeowners. So if we don't like it, we should try working really hard and buying our own homes. And you can do this by not having coffees every day and such. And then you will be able to take advantage of this bonanza as well. But aside from the fact that this is basically like telling people you should go buy a unicorn, it's like impossible as housing prices continue to soar. And aside from the fact that people who do manage to buy are not just having a great time, they're slugged with huge mortgage repayments thanks to these interest rate rises rather than rent repayments, lucky them. But even if you leave all of that to the side, the people who are reaping the majority of the benefit from housing as an investment are not owner-occupiers, of course. They're not even the people that we hear about all the time. You'd think that this was the entire population of Australia, really, by how much they're talked about in the media. Mum and dad investors building their little nest egg. ATO data that was published in The Guardian just last month revealed that it's only 15% of the country that have an investment property. And these people are high wealth, they're high income, they're most likely to have high-powered jobs like surgeons, top lawyers, members of the cabinet in this country who all seem to have about 5 investment properties each. And about 7% of those investors own 25% of all of the investment properties. So it's, shame indeed. It's these people who are driving up housing prices. So it's far easier to grow your portfolio, to add a house to your investment portfolio, than it is to buy a single house to live in. So these investors are one of the groups benefiting from the housing crisis, while people that own a house and live in it, or people who rent, tread water or go backwards. And it's just accepted in Australian politics that these people, property hoarders we should call them, have an absolutely sacred right that can never be infringed on to always make a big return on their investment. So they're passing on any rising costs, real or imagined, to tenants, regardless of the consequences, regardless even if that consequence is homelessness. Banks are, of course, the other big culprit. The higher the prices go, the more that people borrow, the more money that they get, actually. They've got $2 trillion in mortgage debt at the moment, and all of this has contributed to record profits. So just in the first 6 months, I think, of the last financial year, it was over 17 billion, not a billion with a B, dollars profit in 6 months of the year just for the banks. Yeah. And these people, they make it very clear in all of their speeches, that these things are choices, that they make the choice to pass on every rate rise to their customers. The Reserve Bank is another one that makes it very clear in all of their speechifying about justifying cranking up interest rates. They are very open about all of the choices they're making. So they say explicitly, like, yes, what we're doing will mean that owner-occupiers lose their homes. Yes, what we're doing will mean that renters will have to cram more people into each share house, and maybe they'll all have to move out to the sticks or move back in with their parents. But all of those things are actually good. They're positive signs that the market mechanism is working. So renters next need to be on the chopping block for the good of the economy. And the solutions that we're supposed to be grovelling in thanks for are two. One, the HAF, the Housing Future Fund. The Greens have rightly pointed out that the amount of money spent on this wouldn't even touch the sides of this crisis, but I think we need to go further than that. The problem is that housing has been turned into a casino for the wealthy in this country, and the HAF is actually totally in keeping with that. So no matter how much money is being put into it, functionally what it is not money for public housing, no, nothing like that. It's seed funding for more private profit. The second thing we're supposed to be all clamouring for, if you read the Financial Review, is fixing supply, by which they don't mean actually supplying homes to people that need them, supplying rental properties that you could actually afford to live in. They mean removing restrictions on property developers that will allow them to build more cheap shitboxes that they then sell for millions of dollars or charge you hundreds and hundreds of dollars a week to rent. So this will obviously do nothing for lowering rents or housing prices. It's just about maximising opportunity for developers to profit even more. So I think we have to be really critical of this. It's more than just a problem of supply. There's actually a problem of distribution. So as Jerem said right at the start, about 10% of homes empty on census night. There's different measures where they looked at how many homes are actually just empty as investment properties. In Western Sydney, there's areas where it is actually 10%. And there's almost 40,000 homes just in Melbourne and Sydney alone, just on Airbnb, before you even think of all of the other kind of short-term rental platforms. And a majority of those used to be actual rental properties. So these things that are put to us as solutions are not solutions at all. They're just about enriching the same people who have caused this crisis. So in terms of what we do, just to finish up, I think there's sort of two issues. One is that everything you could do individually as a renter is really limited. So, you could challenge that rent increase, you could take them to VCAT, and hats off to you if you actually manage to do that and succeed. But everything in that is rigged for the rich. Not just the rules themselves about what you're allowed to do, but just the actual status quo of property being concentrated in the hands of investors and all of the essentials that we need for our lives being commodities to be speculated on. And that connects, I think, with the second thing, that the problem is actually capitalism. That in this economic system, everything has to be an opportunity to make a profit. All essentials of life, opportunity to make profit. So as renters, our right to have somewhere to live, somewhere that doesn't have black mold in it or with an eviction looming every 12 months is trumped every time by the right of an investor, a landlord, a bank, a developer to make a profit. And all of the political solutions that we can be offered actually just preserve and extend the rights of those people, developers, banks, investors. I think it was right how they were characterised earlier as parasites. So the solutions that we need, well, I mean, I personally truly believe, I'm a member of Socialist Alternative, that ultimately we need to overthrow the capitalist system, because so long as it exists, working people can't ever permanently be guaranteed a right to housing. But today, what I would hope that everyone at this meeting could agree on, and what the project of the Victorian Socialists is that you should all take part in, is that we actually need to build a political alternative that does not accept that profit trumps people every time, and that doesn't accept the fundamental premise that is accepted by Labor and Liberal, that it is right and that it is in fact essential for bankers and developers to be allowed to turn a profit off of housing. So we need to be building a political force in this country that can fight for renters, which means fighting not just for rents to be frozen at what they are. I would not be happy with my rent being frozen at what it is, even though I have those really deluxe doorknobs. But it means fighting for rents to be reversed. And I think very importantly, for all of those empty investment properties to be seized, to be taken off of the hoarders that currently own them. Because they have no right to hoard those things. These need to be handed over, used for their actual purpose, to house people, which means all of that, I think, to achieve that will require building a socialist political force in this country.
Okay, so final section of the meeting. So we've got just time to hear a few contributions, questions, political commentary from the floor. I'm going to get all the people who want to speak to chuck their hands up now, and I'll call like a handful of people up. Otherwise, it'll sort of take a bit of a long time to get through everyone. Okay, so everyone who wants to speak. Sorry, is that a hand over here? Yeah. Okay, so yes. Yes. Okay. 1, 2. Yes. 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 Okay. So we'll have those 4. So come up here. Yeah. And then people can come up and sign a petition.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
I'll just say that. Yeah. Okay. Good.
that'd be great. Okay. And for you, dear lady, the BLF, my goodness. Hi, my name is Teresa Townsend. I am 55 years of age, and I remember the BLF as a child. It was like, yeah, smash them. It was so good, so good. Norm Gallagher, probably you wouldn't know, but yeah, I've grown up in a predominantly Liberal background, but I chose to go the other way. So of course my family hate me. Anyway, so going through that, I'm here for a purpose. I currently work for AGL, who's an energy provider. They're trying to sack me. Okay? And the reason why they're trying to do this is because they don't like me. I'm too different, I'm too old, this, that, and whatever, but they're trying to cut me. And if it wasn't without the support of my beautiful colleagues from the AWU, who actually are like the BLF, right, I would not be here standing here talking to you. Now, I'm going to plead my case. I'm a renter too. My rents have gone up crazy. I live in the Point Cook area, so yeah, it takes me like 10,000 years just to, whatever. We all know that. But the purpose of this is, if you guys could please, I implore for you to sign this beautiful petition that has been set up for me, because if I lose this job, I am a single mother with no friends, no family, no help, okay? And if I lose this job, there goes my house, and I don't know what's going to happen. And of course, because under Centrelink and that, I would not qualify for anything, we'd be just looking at it. But the purpose is that AGL should not be able to do this to me, okay? I know I'm 55, but God damn it, I've paid my time. When I was younger and started in 1985, I lived in the Richmond Commission flats too, so I know what public housing is like, okay? But you know what? They do not deserve to do this, especially with the pathetic excuses like your AHT time is too high. There's others the same, but the pressure and the coercion, the sexism and all the rest that I have endured these past 5 months has been deplorable. Please, if you can help me, save my job, save my child and save me to live. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for coming and speaking to us, Teresa, as well. I wanted to add a short thing to what Lara was saying about Techno Park, which is I was at the protest the other night and we were listening to the proceedings of the council meeting inside, and there was a point when someone, I think it was the planning sustainability expert of the council, was asked, so what are you going to do to help people who are kicked out to find housing again? And the response was, we'll connect you with homelessness services. But that is the attitude of this person, but also that's the attitude of the ruling class of this country, and also in this world. Everywhere things like this are happening, and they've always been happening for the entire history of capitalism. I was reading recently about Bolivia, where in the 2000s, people had to fight like hell to defend their right to access water because it was sold off to private corporations. I was also recently reading an article that Jerem wrote when he went up to Alice Springs and went to a community called Whitegate, where there are Indigenous people who are the traditional custodians of the land, legally recognised as such, who live in corrugated iron shacks, and who in 2014 had all of their access to water and electricity cut off because no power companies and no water companies were going to profit from giving those around 70 people who live there access to water and electricity. Well, there are no human rights under capitalism. That's the thing. That's how this system works. Like, you're right, but that's the problem with, like, Grace in her speech, I think, was right to say, well, what are the things that we're, fighting for? Seizures of empty properties, public housing, things like that. The thing, though, that I think we have to fight for ultimately is to get rid of a system that is run for profit, that no human society should be run for profit. No human society should be capitalist, that every single country in this world, that this entire planet should be run with human need at the centre of every decision that is ever made. And that's the thing that sets our project apart. And the reason I think people should get involved in this, but also throw yourselves into every single moment that people are fighting back and fighting for that better world in the here and now.
Good afternoon. Just wanted to thank the Socialists for doing a really great door knock. I thought that was a really effective way of getting people. In terms of just action, there are 1 million empty houses in this country. There are 13 million empty rooms. We need to start not only attacking and demolishing negative gearing and the capital gains tax, we need to actively start squatting into government offices. There's all these fucking buildings in the city here, they are empty. We've gone through a pandemic, the place is empty. They're struggling to get workers to come back into these offices, and we're just sitting there wasting this space. There is so much space. 1/4 of our city is made up by roads. Think about that. Think about that. In terms of water, someone was just talking about in Northern Ireland when they were privatising the water, you had one executive from the government of one of the water corporations say, you'd think that water comes from the bloody sky, the way these people expect to have water. That's right, they are charging people for their rainwater collection. They are going to fuck us. The gloves are off. You need to get a lot more hairy, a lot more ugly, and a lot more mean. How many fucking developers do we have to kill? Think about it. How many do we have to take out? They will always remember it and they will change their tune. They are not going to listen to you. They are not going to do anything. They think you're fucking mice. Okay? So you need to get angry and nasty. And I'm talking about squatting government offices. I'm talking about burning down buildings. I'm talking about just making a bit more of a name for ourselves. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks so much for those comments. I love the passion and the energy. Oh yeah, I should keep that on. We're winning at the moment. I think that
the fact that there's so many people in this room today and that the speeches have been so good actually gives a lot of hope, I think, for the capacity for people in Melbourne to stand up and fight back against this system that Jasmine was talking about is so just centred around profit for the rich and powerful, and ordinary people lose out. It's pretty inspiring to look back at the past as well, like Verity did, the way that people got together, workers got together to think about how could we organise, how could we resist the attempts of developers, of the rich and powerful, to construct the cities in the way that suits them. And the workers said, no, we want to put up a fight and say, well, the city should be constructed for us. But I think the point that Grace made is really, really important, that the whole system, the way that it's set up, is against us. So, you know, even if we kill a couple of developers, even if we scot in their offices, well, it's not going to be enough because there's always going to be another developer. There's always going to be another government office. We need to embody the spirit of, you know, radical unionism gone past. We need to embody the spirit of socialism and radicalism and say, well, it's not enough to get rid of that developer. We have to get rid of the whole system that backs them up. And ordinary people have the power to do it. Because if you think about everything in our city, if you think about the trams that go past on Swanston Street, if you think about the electricity that lights up these globes, if you think about the water that comes out of Grace's sink and doesn't go anywhere, there's a worker behind that. There's someone who labours upon it, who thinks creatively, who goes to work every day to make it run. But unfortunately, right now, they don't get to decide who gets that electricity. They don't get to decide who goes onto that tram. They don't get to decide who gets that water and at what cost. So at some point, people need to come together and say, it's not the bastards at the top who get to make those decisions anymore. It's bloody us. Yeah.
Okay, just before we finish this bit and everyone can go downstairs, have a beer, make plans, eat chips, whatever is left of your day, there's a final announcement about a campaign that Victorian Socialists is about to launch for the Warrandyte by-election. So our candidate announced, Colleen Bolger, is going to tell us a little bit about that and a little bit about the electorate, I guess, something, yeah, okay. And about the campaign that Victorian Socialists is about to run in that by-election. While she's talking, I'm going to pass her and stay in touch list for Victorian Socialists. Heaps of you will have already obviously bought tickets and you're down the list in that way. But if you want to especially make sure that you draw your name to our attention and you get a phone call straight away about all the other upcoming events, put your names down on that. But yeah, make Colleen welcome for the final news of the day.
Well, comrades, as Jess said, we're taking our fight out to Warrandyte, out into the eastern suburbs of Melbourne to contest the by-election that will be held at the end of next month. And what I can tell you about this seat is that it was one of only 2 seats retained by the Liberal Party in their dismal showing in the last year's state election. So you might think it's not the natural ground for the socialist cause, but we think that we should be taking the fight up to the Liberal Party, that the Liberal candidate expects to just be able to walk into her plum new job in Spring Street, but we think she deserves to be savaged if indeed that happens. Savage because she is affiliated with an organisation that this week has been exposed, for those that couldn't see it already, as running an illegal and immoral operation to demonise and vilify and harass some of the poorest people in our community, people on welfare who received a robo-debt. Right. And this is a party that stood that bigot, Moira Deeming, who after she organised an anti-trans demonstration supported and attended by fascists, still 1/3 of what remains of their MPs, said that yes, the Liberal Party should be her home. And now many of those same MPs are supporting the local candidate that they're running in Warrandyte, Nicole Tayi Werner, No doubt because of her conservative Christian credentials as being a former youth pastor at the anti-gay, wealthiness is next to godliness style of Hillsong Church that she belongs to. But we're also running because millions of working class people are living through one of the hardest crunches on working class living standards in generations, and the Labor Party in power at both the federal and state level are doing next to nothing about it. And so today our focus has been on how the cost of housing is running away ahead of any kind of wage increases, but it's also in fuel, in food, in the price of childcare. It's every aspect of living right now where people are feeling the crunch. And the state government, if it wanted to, could do a whole lot of things to deal with it. They could put a cap on rent. More than that, they could give people a rent holiday to catch up on their rent rises until their wages catch up. If they wanted, they could open state-run childcare facilities and make childcare free. Or they could mandate all organisations, or corporations rather, that get state funding, state contracts, have to give their workers a wage rise in keeping with inflation. And yet, the state government itself, one of the state's biggest employers, had a wages policy of a 1% cap for public sector workers in a 7-8% inflation environment. It's a policy for wage slashing. Instead, they throw their hands up and say, let's leave it to the market. And what does that look like? That looks like holding down wages. It looks like endless interest rate increases, putting the burden on people who have to take out an enormous debt to just put a roof over their head. And it means pushing up unemployment, according to the incoming RBA chairman, which means in concrete terms, 100,000 people or more pushed into the anguish of unemployment. So it's little wonder then that actually Labor haven't announced that they're even going to contest the Warrandyte by-election. And so instead we'll be asking their supporters to support an alternative to this business as usual, rule for the rich of both major parties. So what is that alternative? Well, in this morning's Saturday paper, there's a headline that declares it's a new era for socialist activism. And I think it's a new era for socialist activism because our politics that puts working class people's interests at its heart, our politics that says to face off the climate crisis, we need to dump capitalism, and it's our politics that sounds the alarm over the ever-increasing drive towards a nuclearized global war. Those politics are as urgent and relevant as ever. So let's take up that challenge of making it a new era for socialist activism wherever we are, whether it's on the public housing estates or all the way out east. Let's bring it on.
You're gonna have to stop clapping. We have to leave at some point. So, to sign up to that campaign, there are people going around with computers who can help you get exactly everything that you need to come and be part of that. I urge every single person in this room, go and talk to a member of the Victorian Socialists, find out what you can do, find out exactly how you can be involved, come and talk to the other activists that you've heard speak today about how you can support their struggles and what we can do next. Because we know that none of these challenges are going to evaporate by themselves. There's nothing in this society that says that it's going to get any better, but there's everything that we can do to start the fight from where we are. And that's the message that people have to leave with today. The fight starts with us and it starts now.